This episode is sponsored by the Expert Services Directory. Are you a coach, a consultant, speaker, or trainer who wants to sell your services to corporate clients across the UK, but you're booking fewer than 5 qualified sales calls from your lead generation each month? Or finding that all of your inbound inquiries are coming from junior employees in firms who just want to benchmark your pricing rather than actually introduce you to the real decision maker who has the buying power to get you in? And you really want to generate real qualified inbound inquiries from decision makers in organisations around the UK who actually have buying power and want to purchase your services as an external supplier? Well, that is exactly what the Expert Services Directory is for. And if you visit www.expertservicesdirectory.com and sign up now, you can generate qualified corporate leads for 12 whole months by being part of the Expert Services Directory, where we proactively market specialist providers just like you to real decision makers in companies across the UK who are ready to buy from external suppliers. And if you use the code podcast at checkout, all caps, you'll also get a free corporate priorities calendar that you can use to understand exactly what decision makers are prioritising at each point in the year so that you can create solutions that sell all year round as well. All you have to do is visit www.expertservicesdirectory.com and enter the code podcast, all in capital letters, at the checkout now. Right, let's get back to the episode. Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Okay, we are back. An exciting episode. It's exciting for me because it's something that I haven't shared on the podcast before, and that is always a good start to an episode. And really to, I guess, the middle of this quarter, which, if anyone else is counting, about 8 weeks until the summer holidays kick in. I obviously don't have children, but for those of you who do, firstly, you're absolute heroes, and the world needs more epic parents. But secondly, if you're anything like the 80%-ish of parents that I work with, you will already be thinking and planning school holidays and summer activities, just like all of the decision makers who are working inside organisations. So this is my casual reminder that the summer is coming and that you are going to have very limited window between now and probably the second week of July if you are based in the UK, and between now and mid-June if you are based in Central Europe or the US, where you still have good working time available and where your decision makers are still accessible. And that's really, really important to know, because I know that I talk about it a lot on the podcast and often say things like, before we know it, it'll be September. Before we know it, summer will be here. Before we know it, it'll be the end of another year. And it's really easy to hear those things, but not really hear them and think that you've got so much more time. Now, that time, not to scare anybody, that time is running down. So if you have not looked at your sales process for the first half of this year and assessed whether it's working or whether there are gaps that need changing or making them more efficient, now is the time to do it and start making changes. If you haven't prioritised lead generation this year and you've been coasting by on warm referrals and introductions and semi-networking where you're talking to people in your industry and hoping that they might make a referral for you, now is the time to start some controllable lead generation. If you are getting to the end of this first half of the year and realize that you have been heavy in delivery mode and that you haven't made time to build your pipeline, to think about the way that you're going to plan out the second half of the year, to look at your sales strategy, again, now is that time. And you know me, I love to have a sense of humour about things, except urgent sales matters. And this is now getting to the point where it is urgent. And the reason I say that so bluntly is because every year in September, every year I talk about how September is the best time to sell to companies, and it is. But that best time to sell to companies is made much harder, infinitely harder, if you haven't done any of the prep. And the prep work means making sure that you've done some lead generation, making sure that you have set your business up for success, making sure that you haven't arranged so much delivery in September that it's impossible for you to do anything else in terms of revenue generation and streamlining your sales process. Okay, so rather than going into the summer holidays this year and thinking, oh, it's fine, I'll just coast by, and then in September, Jess will tell me it's the best time and I'll be motivated again, I just want you to hear what I'm saying, which is we're gonna have to do some work now. And that is so that you can have the best Q4 possible. And what I mean by that is not just in terms of revenue, but also in terms of stress and levels of stress, which often peak during the summer periods for coaches and consultants and speakers and trainers and done for you service providers who haven't sorted their sales process earlier in the year. It ends up not being that the summer holidays are full of rest and relaxation and recharging and doing all the great things for your brain and your body and your well-being that you need to do as a business owner or anyone who works, because it is difficult to keep the same level of energy and focus and capacity and motivation the whole year round. But that's not possible if you haven't prepped for your sales process, because what ends up happening is people spend the entire summer holidays, instead of feeling like they can rest and recharge, feeling really guilty that they haven't got their sales process to where it needs to be, that they haven't done lead generation, and then they'll spend a lot of their time working and feeling even more guilty that they're not taking the time out to relax and rest with partners, friends, family, and so on. So this is my public service announcement. Sounded like I was an influencer, didn't it? But this is my public service announcement. If you haven't started reviewing your half-year results yet, you must. And you must use this period between now and wherever you are in the world, the start of the summer holidays, to actually do something about them. Okay? So that's where we're starting today's episode. And today's episode is exciting because I'm talking about lead generation in a different way than normal. And actually, some of you might have joined me on a free masterclass that I ran a couple of weeks ago, the first in over a year, which was exciting for a number of reasons, actually. If you were there on the masterclass, yay. Thank you for joining me live. The masterclass itself was great, if I do say so myself, because the information was really interesting. We talked about some of the trends and insights from this year and how those trends and insights are impacting the B2B sales space in the latter half of 2026. Another exciting thing that happened was actually midway through the masterclass, and if you have watched it, you will know that midway I looked to my right, and that was because our bees were swarming. So about halfway through this great live masterclass that I, did for the first time in over a year, I looked out of my office window and saw approximately 40,000 of our bees just pottering over really into next door's garden, which was a little frustrating. Actually meant that for about 2 hours after the masterclass, instead of doing the things that I wanted to do, which was kick back, have a coffee, sit in the sunshine, revel in my glorious training ability, I actually spent in a pair of shorts, up a step ladder, in my neighbour's tree, reassuring him that it's fine. Swarms are the most docile that bees ever are because they haven't got a home to protect. So it's all good. They probably won't sting you or me or anyone else at this point. But for those of you who are interested in beekeeping, specifically my beekeeping, the bees are fine. Managed to get them into a box. We now are a multiple hive family. And yeah, having 3 beehives at the bottom of the garden is, I'm going to say, interesting. Good for honey production, but interesting for walking. Okay, so let's dig into today's episode then and do a little bit of a recap, really, on lead generation. So when we talk about lead generation from a B2B perspective, this is really important because we are actively talking about the process that we use to generate conversations with decision makers. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about lead generation. So you'll have probably heard me describe it in similar ways before, but we are specifically looking at the process of identifying, targeting, and approaching qualified decision makers in organisations so that they book sales calls with us. And most importantly, sales calls that are qualified, meaning they're with the right person who actively is responsible for our area of specialism within the organisation and who controls the budget to pay us. Now, I think this is really important because sometimes when we talk about lead generation, people think that we're talking about a specific methodology. Okay. And by methodology, I mean the ways, the practical strategies that people use to generate the leads. Cold email outreach, for example, LinkedIn outreach, or any other of the 7 different methods of lead generation that I teach and have taught for years. Now, this is and needs to be a really, really clear distinction because sometimes what I'm seeing when I'm talking about lead generation, either on the podcast or in my newsletter or on LinkedIn, which I did a couple of weeks ago, and was kind of a bonkers post where lots of people replied and commented, which was cool. Sometimes we get a bit caught up in the methodology and not the actual process. And so we need to have that distinction because sometimes when we're talking about it, people will say, oh, but it doesn't work. And what they mean is the method of lead generation that I have tried isn't currently producing sales calls for me that are qualified. And again, we have to talk about these nuances because there is this space at the moment of people who are selling, B2B sales training, and they haven't worked in B2B sales or they haven't been responsible for lead generation or sales strategy inside organizations. So they will sometimes use those terms interchangeably and they will only teach one method and profess for that to be the best. Now, not saying that's not a great sales strategy, obviously it is, but it doesn't make it true. And so what I want us to understand from this time that we spend together today is the difference, lead generation as a process versus the specific methodologies that you might employ to generate leads, but also a reminder of the purpose of successful lead generation, which is to book qualified sales calls, not to make sales. And again, that distinction is really, really important because when we judge our lead generation from a success perspective, lots of people say, oh, but I only made 1 sale or I didn't make any sales from this batch of leads. Now, that's not the job of your lead generation. And if you judge it like that, then your lead generation will ultimately always look like it is failing. But also, it gives us problems when it comes to troubleshooting why your sales process is or isn't working as efficiently as it could be. Because when we lump lead generation in with the actual sale at the end of the process, and we say, oh, well, it's not working because I didn't make any sales, what we're doing is blaming everything on the lead generation piece of the puzzle or the process. And we're not actually digging into, was it lead generation that was the problem? Did we not target, identify, approach the right decision makers in the right way, have clear metrics, troubleshoot it accurately, make it as efficient and effective as possible to generate sales calls, or were there problems in other parts of the process? And we all know the 5-step process that I train, teach, trademarked, the Selling to Corporate 5-step framework around understanding who we're selling to and what we're selling them, clarity, the process of lead generation and generating qualified leads to turn into sales calls, business development, that building, maintaining and leveraging relationships so that they can turn into revenue, offers and proposals, creating offers that meet the need and articulating them in a way that converts, and then delivery and resell, delivery and upsell. The process of creating a great client experience and then being able to expand the work that we're doing with organizations. So when we lump sales into, oh, well, these leads didn't turn into sales, so lead generation doesn't work, we forget about those other key parts of the process and we don't troubleshoot whether actually it was a problem in those areas rather than lead generation itself. Okay? So as we go through this episode today, I want you to keep that in mind because it is really important as we're having these conversations about selling to companies, particularly in a market where there is an influx of coaches and consultants who have come away from B2C sales because the market there has changed significantly and there's been a significant downturn in the business to consumer market and have popped up into the B2B space with great marketing and confident marketing, but not necessarily the attention to detail that delivery requires. We have to make our sales processes even more efficient, even more effective, even more driven by quality and consultative sales so that the client understands what they're going to be getting, what they are going to be experiencing upfront. Okay? Now, with that in mind, we're going to talk about 2 different types of lead generation that I think all coaches and consultants, and by coaches and consultants, we all know that I also mean trainers, speakers, and done-for-you service providers, but it's just a lot to say every single time, that we need to be looking at this year and understanding whether we are embracing both types of lead generation in our businesses. And if we're not, problem. Now, I will say that if you're on the masterclass a couple of weeks ago, you'll have heard me talk about 4 different types of lead generation. That would just be an insanely long podcast episode, so that's why I haven't done it. But these are the 2 mains. So refresher for those of you who were on the masterclass and brand new info for those of you who weren't able to make it. Now, before I get into today's episode, I do want to say that this episode is sponsored, like many others, by the Expert Services Directory. And given that we're going to be talking about lead generation today, it feels really important to mention that the Expert Services Directory is designed to help you as a coach, a consultant, trainer, speaker, or done-for-you service provider to get more eyes, and specifically more of the right eyes on your business. Now, that's really, really important at the moment, probably more than ever, because decision makers are investing more in external suppliers than they were in previous years. That's as a result of permanent headcount costs having to be decreased. It's also as a result of organizations recognizing the impact that external suppliers can make and not needing the same ramp up time, same onboarding, same benefits in kind as permanent employees. So it is all about making sure that your business, your area of specialism, the transformations that you can provide are in front of corporate decision makers so that they can find you instead of somebody who's just got a cool website and good SEO. Okay. Now, the Expert Services Directory is all about partnering with the very best qualified, credible, consultative coaches, consultants, speakers, trainers, and done-for-you service providers to help you get those right eyes on your business. And the way that we do that is to make sure that we are doing proactive marketing for your specific specialism. And actually, you might not know, but with the Expert Services Directory, if you do purchase a standard listing, then you are going to have your specialism promoted proactively to over 1,000 decision makers a month. And if you buy a Directory Plus listing, you are promoted to over 2,000 decision makers per month. That is a huge amount of brand awareness, visibility, and the right people seeing your business and what it is that you have to offer. Now, of course, we do only have 10 suppliers in each category. Some of those categories are already completely sold out. So if you are somebody who is looking to increase visibility around your business, to get the right corporate decision-making eyes on your offers, your services, and the transformations that you offer to organisations, then you do need to fill out an application form. And to do that, you can go to expertservicesdirectory.com/sales. And if you click on any of the Join Now buttons, you'll be redirected to a form. And it will ask you to fill in some questions so that we can help assess which categories are going to be the best for you and make sure that we're creating a standard of service provider that we are partnering with and therefore marketing the right people to organisations directly. Okay, so we're using this as an opportunity to create a real standard of expert suppliers for organisations that they can pick from and that they can actually feel comfortable and excited about working with and know that they're getting the best supplier who can create the best transformation rather than just the best marketer. All right. So if you are interested in the Expert Services Directory and getting yourself listed into those categories and you want to be one of 10 suppliers in each category and location, make sure you go to expertservicesdirectory.com/sales. And if you click any of the Join Now buttons, you will be redirected to an application form. It asks 9 questions, I think. None of them are difficult, but it helps us to know who will be the best fit for each category and obviously give you advice on the ways that the Expert Services Directory may or may not benefit you and your business with where you are at the moment. Because obviously the sad thing about having an application process is that sometimes we have to say no to people who it won't benefit or it's not useful to. So if you have any questions about it, please feel free to go to the application form and there's a category where you can select other and you can write in any questions that you have about joining the directory and I personally will come back to you. Alrighty then. So with that in mind, let's talk about lead generation and these 2 types. Now, I think this is important because like I have been saying over the course of probably 6 or 7 episodes, the B2B space and landscape has changed. And that is because of a few things. Some of those things are really positive, like the fact that companies want to invest more in external suppliers because they realise the benefits. And some of it is through things that are more negative. So, like I mentioned earlier, an influx of suppliers who are great marketers but not great at delivering. And that means that there is not only a sense of, great, we want to buy and we want specialists and we have budget to pay them from decision makers, but it also means that there's a wariness because there are so many external suppliers who are maybe not running things quite in the right way. And that is making it very difficult to establish trust for organisations. Now, I could do a whole episode, maybe at some point I will, about the impact of that and what we're going to see, but that probably won't be until the second half of 2026, because there are other things that are more important for you to know right now. But I will say that it means that lead generation has become more important than ever before. And that's because most people, when they start a business and they decide that they're going to sell to companies, most people will have worked in an organisation before. And so what they'll do is they'll leverage any warm network that they've got. And maybe at that point where they're leveraging their warm network, they'll pick up some business. And that's always really good. Gives them some cash flow, gets them into organisations, gives confidence, gives potentially case studies and or testimonials that they can refer back to. But more commonly what happens is it encourages people to think that they don't need to do any kind of other lead generation. And so what ends up happening is that those people exhaust their warm network and then have nowhere else really to go. And at that point, the panic sets in because obviously revenue isn't being generated, and they start to question every aspect of their business. Suddenly they're not questioning their sales process and, did they run that sales call perfectly? They're starting to question, is what I do needed? Because I'm not getting anyone who wants to talk to me about it. And from that point, they'll then start to undercharge and experience some of the other issues that we see when people lack confidence around their sales process and sales skills. Okay. So lead generation has become really important, and it's become important because we know, and the sensible among us and those who've listened to the podcast for a while will know, that without new leads filling up your pipeline, it's very, very difficult to have a business that is sustainable. And by sustainable, I mean having sales that come in regularly every single month or every single quarter, so that you're not having these huge feast and famine moments in your business where either you're super, super busy, full of delivery, got loads of signed contracts, but no time to do any other sales process work, no time to do any lead generation. So you end up going from being really, really busy, really, really booked to, oh my gosh, I've got nothing. There is nothing in my pipeline. And now I'm going to have to work really, really hard to try and generate instant leads, try and do, the things that I can with my warm network, try and find a way to generate revenue. And just being in that like roller coaster of stress and anxiety and revenue. Right? So that's why we have to take a strategic approach to our lead generation. And it's one of the reasons that I want to talk about this in the way that I am today around there are two types of lead generation. So remember, we're not talking about methodology and the way or the strategy that you're executing. We're talking about the two types of lead generation that are important. The first one is active lead generation. Now, I will say these are terms that I've coined. This is not, this is not something that if you've read, I don't know, insert sales book here, that you will necessarily have seen. It might not be terminology that you recognize. These are terms that I've coined, and I will give definitions for them. But you will hopefully understand them and it will make sense when we go through it together. Okay. So the first one that we've got is active lead generation. And active lead generation I've defined as lead generation that works unless you have to stop implementing it. So what that means is that it is active strategies that you have to do every week or month or quarter, and that whilst you are doing them, whilst you're implementing them, they work. They book sales calls, they help you have conversations, they make sure that you are identifying, targeting, and approaching the right decision makers and getting that steady stream of sales calls that leads to proposals and revenue. Okay. Now, methodologies that you might recognize from active lead generation are things like email outreach, LinkedIn outreach, things that are controllable, but also things that you have to do. They are not things that happen if you or a VA or somebody else isn't doing them. You might also hear of active lead generation being referred to as proactive outreach. Okay. But essentially, what we are talking about is any kind of lead generation that relies on you doing it and that stops having an impact if you stop doing it. All right. That might sound a bit negative at first, and it's not. Okay. Active lead generation is really important, particularly if you are not currently booked with corporate clients. All right. And the reason that's really important, especially if you're not booked currently with corporate clients, is that active lead generation is completely within your control. These are strategies that are completely controllable by you. And there are times in your business when you are new to business, when you're setting up your business, when you're going through a famine period in your business, when you are not currently fully booked with corporate clients, where you have the time and energy to be able to implement an active lead generation strategy, whatever that might be. Okay. And so if you are not currently fully booked with corporate clients, you absolutely should be using your free time and energy to prioritize active lead generation, because you have that control to book those sales calls, to go on, build those relationships and make money from them. And it will help you to fill your pipeline. All right. Now, obviously, it's a good thing. We want to be filling our pipeline. We want to be taking control of our lead generation. We want to be doing activities that are metrics driven. However, as I mentioned earlier, you do get to stages in your business where you are so booked with delivery that actually you don't have time to do active lead generation. So you might be working across multiple programs of work with organizations. You might have sold a really intense piece of work to an organization. Maybe you signed a multi-six-figure contract with an organization and it's taking up a lot of time, headspace, and capacity, which means you don't have the time to prioritize an active method of lead generation without compromising the quality of experience the client is getting. Now, loads of you who listen to this podcast will understand that and you'll be like, oh my gosh. And it's exactly what happens in that feast famine roller coaster, right? Usually we get really, really busy with delivery, no time to prioritize lead generation, suddenly finish up a contract or finish up a piece of work and realize, oh gosh, we've got no revenue. This is a nightmare. Frantically get into lead generation and bounce between the two. This is where, when you're at that point where you are booked with clients or about to be fully booked with clients, or recognize that you don't have the time, energy, and capacity to be doing active lead generation, where you need to implement what we call passive visibility. What I call passive visibility. I don't know why I said that as we. That's like me congratulating the whole sales world for a finding. And I'm like, no, it was me. I've defined that. That'll be on my headstone, I think. But anyway, passive visibility is lead generation that happens even when you are not involved. So that means that it is working in the background whilst you are not able to actively be using a strategy or implementing a strategy. And it works on your behalf to build brand awareness for your business, to build visibility for your business, and to build inquiries and leads for your business without you actively having to go out and do it all of the time. Okay. Now, I realise as I'm saying this that there'll be some people who say, but Jess, why can't I, why isn't passive visibility best for me if I just really hate lead generation and I have no clients? And the reason that it's not best for you if you have no clients and just hate lead generation, one is because actually part of your work as a business owner is to be a good salesperson for your business. So outsourcing your lead generation without knowing what works, what messaging is going to work for you, what targeting is appropriate, that is building your business on sand. So you need to know those things. You need to have experience with those things before you can go on and outsource or implement a passive visibility method, because otherwise you could get those things completely wrong and then your passive visibility method wouldn't work. And that would be really annoying. The second thing is that if you aren't currently booked with clients and, maybe this is your first foray into selling to organizations, passive visibility methods are designed to be things that are longer term. And by longer term, I mean, they're not designed to create sales calls every single week. And they might not create sales calls every single week. They're passive, so they get you in front of the right decision makers. And it is then up to you to leverage those relationships as and when suits you. So if you are implementing a passive visibility lead generation method, you might want to have a B2B newsletter or some kind of process for keeping those relationships warm whilst you're not ready to leverage them into sales calls and revenue yet. You might want to have some kind of follow-up process that supports you leveraging that passive visibility method. Okay. So when we talk about passive visibility lead generation, what we're actually talking about is lead generation methods that happen and that lead to brand awareness, visibility, inquiries, sales calls over time, activities that compound, right? So when we're looking at the methodologies or strategies for those things, we're looking at things like presenting awards, not a traditional lead generation method, just as an FYI. If you're thinking, oh, I like presenting awards, but I hate cold email outreach, you cannot you cannot switch. um, it's things like speaking on internal company podcasts. It's things like being featured in a curated directory where the proactive marketing is being done without you being part of it. It's being involved in things that help you to rank more highly in AI search or GEO. So what we're talking about here is this idea that when you are fully booked with clients and you are too busy to be going and doing active lead generation and sending cold outreach via LinkedIn or email or any of the other methods that we look at that involve you being in control and you doing the activity, passive lead generation and that passive visibility is all about helping build your brand awareness, helping build your visibility, helping build leads and inquiries with the right decision makers because you are being put in front of them regularly without you necessarily having to do it, to execute it every single week, month, year, and so on. All right. So if we think about it then, what's important? Well, firstly, it's important that you recognise the difference between the two. Hopefully I've made it super clear. Secondly, it's really important to understand that you will need to use both in your business at different parts or stages of your business. So again, for those of you who are not currently fully booked with corporate clients or about to be fully booked with corporate clients, you do need an active lead generation strategy. So if you aren't currently at that stage where you're fully booked or about to be, you need to be doing something like cold email outreach or LinkedIn outreach, which gives you volume, control, measurable metrics. If you are at that point where you're about to get very busy with delivery or you're about to be fully booked and you can't take on more clients now, and you want to think about your long-term brand awareness, visibility, and lead generation, you need to be thinking about what passive visibility lead generation strategies you are employing in your business. Because believe me, the landscape has changed. Decision makers are searching actively for external suppliers. So if you're fully booked and you're not doing anything on that passive visibility front, you're not going to show up in search. So when they are actively looking, because they are actively looking, you're not going to show up in search on AI. You're not going to show up in search on Google. And actually then you're just sort of relying on referrals and hoping that you'll be top of mind. So we need to be moving with the times and employing both active and passive lead generation strategies in our business when they are relevant. And the third thing I'm going to say here, and it may be popular or not, is that you have to start using things that are proven. It is baffling to me, like absolutely baffling to me, not in a judgmental way, but just in a I'm incredibly curious way, that people are not using proven lead generation strategies. Instead, they're saying, oh, I'm going to test it myself. And I'm thinking, why? Lead generation is one of the cheapest parts of the sales process to learn or to execute. And yet people are wasting tons of time, energy, headspace, and losing out on sales calls and contracts because they don't want to spend money upfront and learn a proven method. But what that means is that those same people are not able to put together from any kind of AI or from any theoretical kind of masterclass they might have been to, they're not able to put together a fully fledged strategy that includes the right metrics that they should be looking at or expecting to manage their expectations around volume of work. They're also not able to then troubleshoot what's happened or what's gone wrong and how do we fix that. So that means that these lead generation methods that you are testing out yourself, A, are probably not fully formed or correctly formed in the first place, but B, they're basically impossible for you to troubleshoot. And what that means is that then everyone's doing this lead generation, which is all super personalized and super tailored, and none of it is standardized, which means it's impossible to monitor, to manage, to troubleshoot, to do differently and make more efficient and effective. Okay. So if you are somebody who knows it's May, I want to spend the next 8 weeks putting my business into the best place possible, and I do not currently have a pipeline where I've got leads, and I need to have that so that I have sales calls before September so I can convert revenue either over the summer, before the summer, or in September, I firmly recommend our cold outreach conversion course. It gives you the exact strategy and proven templates and troubleshooting guides that myself and my clients have used both in the corporate sales team space and in the entrepreneurial space for over 10 years, and that have proven response rates and proven metrics around expectations so that you can troubleshoot effectively and know exactly what is working or not working in your lead generation process. So if you want the cold outreach conversion course, I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes for you. You can go and grab that. If you want to use the code BF50 at the checkout, you also get a little bit of a discount for being a podcast listener. And if you are somebody who is at the stage in your business where you know that you're on the way to having a big delivery period, so perhaps you know that September through December is your busiest time in the year for delivery, and you know you're not going to have the opportunity or time or headspace to be able to execute an active lead generation method, you absolutely want to be getting yourself onto the application form for the Expert Services Directory and letting us proactively market your specialisms to over 1,000 decision makers in standard listings and over 2,000 decision makers per month in Directory Plus. All right. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I've really enjoyed going through it with you, and I'm excited for our episodes into the rest of May and June, which, just feels, like I say, the year is whizzing past and I'm just trying to keep up. Have a really, really lovely rest of your week. I am off to check our bees and see whether we've had any more swarms, honey, or exciting incidents. I'll see you in the next episode.